In this video, I'm going to show you how I set up my Thrustmaster T.16000M FCS HOTAS for use in IL-2 Sturmovik Battle of Stalingrad. And as part of this, I'm going to show you how I use Thrustmaster's target software to create a mapping profile for use in the game. This video is mostly aimed at beginners, maybe someone who's just bought this HOTAS and wants to get some ideas on how to set it up and how to use the target software. First thing to do is go to Thrustmaster's website and click through to their support website. From there you can select your HOTAS and download your drivers. Make sure you read the release notes for how to use the drivers. In particular, they do say that you should install the drivers before you plug in your HOTAS. You can also download the target software from here. It's the fourth one down on the list. There's also a user manual which is worth reading if you want to understand how to use target. And that's it. You don't need the script editor at this stage. That's for more advanced users. So here's what you get when you load up the target software. I'm going to spend most of this video in target showing you how to map the buttons on your HOTAS to key commands, and then I'll go through the button mapping profile that I've created for Battle of Stalingrad. So to demonstrate this software, I'm going to click on New Configuration. I'll call it Test 1, and the important thing is to select Advanced from this drop down, so that we can use layers, and then choose the location that you want to save the profile in. That will take us on to the next step, where you just need to choose the controllers that you want to include in your profile, and in my case it's the joystick and the throttle. That brings us onto this screen where things start to get a little bit complicated. What we've got here is a list of the axes available on each of your controllers and the variable name currently assigned to each axis. For example, the left-right axis on your joystick, which is typically your roll, has currently got the variable DX axis assigned, and the up-down axis on your joystick, which is typically your pitch, has got variable DXY axis assigned. And you can see here that the lever at the front of the throttle also has the variable DXY axis assigned. So there's a duplication there, and what that means is when you go into your game and set the joystick up-down movements to control your pitch, it means that the lever at the front of the throttle will also control your pitch. I'm going to change that so that there's no duplication of variables on this list, and I'll show you how I set up my stick and throttle for Battle of Stalingrad. I leave the X and Y axes as they are, set to DXX and DXY, and they will be my roll and pitch. That's fairly standard. I'm not going to use the rotation axis on the stick for the rudder, so I'm going to set that to none, so that it has no function in the game. Similarly, I'm not going to use this thrust slider on the base of the stick, so I'll set that to none as well. I'm going to use the lever at the front of the throttle as my rudder control, and I'll set that to the variable name DXZ rotation axis so that there's no conflict with the pitch axis above. And I will set the main slider on the throttle as my throttle axis. So let's change that to DX throttle so that it doesn't conflict with the roll. And then I'm going to use this wheel axis on the side of the throttle for my wheel brake. It's got the variable name DXZ axis. There's no conflict with any other axis there, so that's fine. The rest of these axes I'm going to set to none because I'm not going to use them in the game. And the final three on the list relate to pedals, which I don't have, so again I'll set those to none. You can change the response curves on any of these axes by clicking on the arrow to the right. Here you can add dead zones, you can change the shape of the response, but I leave them all as the default linear response. So once you've set up your axes and you're happy with the response curves, you click on next, and it's time to assign keys to your HOTAS. And the first thing we have to talk about is how to use layers. Because we've set this up as an advanced profile, we've got access to up to 5 different layers. I'm just going to use 2, layers 0 and 1. And what it means is I can assign up to 2 different keyboard commands to each button on the HOTAS. To enable this functionality, we need to assign a button on the HOTAS to act as the toggle between the layers. And I'm going to use TS2, which is the fire button at the middle of the stick. Click on the button, drag it into the box, and then select toggle. Click on OK. So now we can map keybinds to buttons on the HOTAS on 2 different layers, and when we're in game with the profile running, we can use this button to switch between the layers. Let's go through a few examples of assigning keyboard commands to the HOTAS. Let's start with the front trigger. You need to click on the button, drag it into this area here, select the layer that you want to work with, in this case layer 0. And I'm going to use layer 0 as my default. Most of my mappings will be in layer 0. Enter the name of the command, and then you need to find the keyboard command from the game, which will correspond to this function. In this case, it's right alt and space to fire the machine guns. Save that, and then select the type, which will be generally either pulse or hold for this basic configuration. In this example, it's going to be hold because I want to fire the machine guns for as long as I'm holding the trigger. Add the event and you'll see it appear on the right hand side there, and then you can map another button. Let's look at an example where I use both layers. So I want to use this secondary fire button here to fire my cannons when I'm in layer 0, and to fire my rockets when I'm in layer 1. Starting in layer 0, the keyboard command for firing the cannons is left alt and space, and that's going to be a hold type command. Once I've added that, it will appear here on the right at layer 0. I can then go back and select layer 1, change the function to fire rockets. The keyboard command for that is R. I can either select that here, or you can just press R in this box and it will appear. This is going to be a pulse type command because when I press the button, I just want to fire one lot of rockets. Add the event and it will appear on the right hand side with a 1 next to it. So now this button has 2 functions assigned to it. Either fire the cannons if I'm in layer 0, or fire my rockets if I'm in layer 1. So using this 2-layer approach, let's look at my mapping profile for Battle of Stalingrad. Going back to the target dashboard, I'm going to select my profile for Battle of Stalingrad and click on edit, and then walk through how I've set it up. Selected my stick and throttle. I've got my 5 axes set up in the same way that I demonstrated earlier in this video. I'm using 2 layers. The middle fire button on my stick will be my toggle between the layers, just in the same way as I demonstrated earlier. I'm going to expand the list of button mappings on the right hand side and then go through them one by one. You'll be able to see the keyboard commands that I've got in game for each function, but you should check your own keyboard commands in game because they may be different to mine. Starting at the top then, we've got the front trigger. In layer 0, I've got that set to fire weapon group 1, which is usually the machine guns on the plane. And in layer 1, I've got it set to fire all weapons, which is usually the machine guns and the cannons. The top left fire button I've got set to fire weapon group 2, which is usually the cannons. And in layer 1, I've got it set to launch rockets as a pulse type command. The top right fire button I've got set to fire weapon group 3, although I don't actually use that in the game. I don't think there are many planes with 3 weapon groups, but on layer 1 I've got it set to drop bombs. And that's really handy because it means you're forced to switch layers before you can release your bombs, which helps to prevent any unintended release. The drop bombs mapping is also a pulse type command. Next up is the hat switch on the top of the stick. I've set the up-down positions to operate the flaps. And the left and right positions to change the engine mixture. That's everything I'm going to assign to the stick. You've still got a lot of buttons on both sides of the base that you can use for more mappings. Moving on to the throttle using this change controller slider. Let's start with this small button at the base of the throttle, which is where your thumb rests. And I'm going to use this for quick zoom max on both layers. So that's a really handy way. Once you've spotted something, you can zoom into the max to get an ID on it. Next up are the 2 buttons on the front of the throttle, and I'm using these for my propeller pitch control. Moving to the left, there's a button that can be pushed forwards and backwards, and I'm using that as my pilot head zoom in and out. It can be useful to have different types of zoom functions available to you in the game depending on what you're doing. That's why I've got the quick zooms and also the pilot head zoom as well. Moving round to the side of the throttle, there are 3 different hat switches here. Starting with the middle one, I'm using the up position for my water radiator. That's going to be to open the radiator. The right position is going to be to open my oil radiator. So depending on what planes you fly, you're probably going to have a water and or an oil radiator. Some planes will have cowl flaps, so you might want to switch these into cowl flap open and close if you're flying those planes. Then left and down is to close those radiators. Moving on to the lower hat switch, I've got Discord push to torque on the up position, quick zoom level 3 on the right position. This is 1 step down from quick zoom max, which I've got bound to the thumb button just underneath this hat switch, but I like to have the flexibility to use different types of zoom depending on whether I'm spotting or engaged in combat. The down position I've got bound to engine boost. This was when I was flying the Spitfire Mark 5B. I don't think I use engine boost on any other plane that I'm currently flying, so you may not need this. Similarly, I've got the left position bound to toggle supercharger, and that will only be necessary if you're flying a plane that requires you to manually shift the supercharger gear. Note that this is a pulse type binding rather than a hold. Finally, we have the top hat switch, and I'm using this for my trims. Up and down are my pitch trims, left and right are my rudder trims, and left and right on layer 1 are my aileron trims. I'm also using the down switch on layer 1 for my landing gear. And that's it, the profile is done. You can save. Once you've saved it and exited back to the dashboard, you can even print the profile. Here's what the stick bindings look like. And here are the throttle bindings. Once you've saved your mapping file, you can go to File Explorer, locate the file and duplicate it in order to make different profiles for different planes. But note that any duplicate files you make in File Explorer don't automatically show in the target dashboard. You've got to click on Edit Configuration, load up the file, and then it will be in target and you can save it and it will appear on your dashboard. Once you've completed your setup and you're ready to play the game, you must run your target profile before you launch the game. And if it's worked, you should get a box like this. What target does is it combines the throttle and the stick into a virtual controller called Thrustmaster Combined. If you get an error message at this point, you can try restarting your PC to see if that clears it up. Otherwise, you may need to uninstall everything, including the target software and your HOTAS and its drivers, and start afresh. The only advice I can give is when you are installing your HOTAS drivers and connecting your HOTAS, make sure you connect them directly to the motherboard, in other words to the USB sockets on the back of your PC, and don't try to use any kind of USB hub. The final step, once you've created your profile, you're running it and you've loaded up the game, is to map the axes that you created to their respective functions. In this example, that's going to be the pitch, the roll, the yaw, the wheel brake, and the engine throttle. The throttle axis has come up negative, but you can click on invert axis here to change that, and that's it, you're ready to fly. I hope this has been helpful, and if you're a more advanced user, let us know in the comments what else you use Target for. Many thanks for watching.